Welcome to the Building Web3 podcast. I have my good friend, Karan. He is the co-founder and CEO of Mira. Before we get too deep into what Mira is, give us a brief background on yourself. How'd you get into this Web3 X AI world?
Thanks, Jax. Thanks for having me. It's a bit of an interesting story. I come from the investing world. I used to work at Accel. It's a global venture fund. I'm sure most people have heard of it. But I was like one of the few like nut jobs there doing crypto while everyone else was like doing B2B SaaS. And I spent the last 3 years of my life just investing on frontier technology. So I was exposed to founders building incredible things across, 3D worlds, crypto, generative AI. Interestingly, generative AI was considered frontier back then and not consensus. And very quickly realized that that's where most of like leverage of value creation lies. But being an investor, it's an interesting thing that you don't really get. You have so much optionality. There's like paralysis in terms of what you want to do, right? Because you can do basically whatever you want. And I was very like discerning, saying I want to do something that is like really potentially impactful. And as AI kind of picked up and became like this big category, I was still not convinced because I'm like most of the value will accrue to like an open AI and stuff. And that really changed. I still remember like the seminal moment that changed was when Llama 2 came out. And I'm like, holy shit, there is going to be like a counterbalance to this. There's going to be like open models that I can actually compete. And what this means is it's just going to create so much more value across the board for anything downstream of that. So I was pretty convinced that this is going to be the net new like technology shift. And ideologically, personally, like I have been so drawn to the idea of having digital capital formation to like really spur up this next generation of infrastructure, right? So imagine like how different mobile would have been or how different cloud would have been if there were crypto economic incentives to allow like bottom up kind of bootstrapping. And I felt like, with AI, it was at a point where the technology is mature enough that you can really apply it in these new fields. So my entire thesis was always that AI is the technology shift. Crypto is going to be the tool that lets me supercharge whatever I can build in that. And that led to the formation of Mira. And in that process, met my two amazing co-founders. Sid, my co-founder CTO, is basically we actually participated in a seed round for his last company called Stata Labs. And once he exited that, it was like a natural progression for me to kind of work with him. And our third co-founder, Ninad, we've also known for a long time, used to be a leader in the product and engineering team at Uber. So, three of us really, got deep in the trenches and started building Mira a year ago now.
But first, let's talk about our amazing sponsor, HiMapper, who helps make this show possible. They're keeping maps up to date in a really clever way. All you need to do is drive your normal routes with their smart dash cam installed. No extra routes, no extra hassle, just drive like you always do and get rewarded. Join HiMapper and keep the map fresh for everyone. Yeah, it's amazing. I often say like there were two main product market fits for crypto. Like we had stable coins and then DeFi. And now I really feel like with AI, we're seeing a shift. Why? So for people that are maybe skeptical, they really only stick around for the beginning of the episode, but talk to them a little bit about like why AI and crypto are actually a good match for one another.
Yeah, I think there are a couple of like vectors here, right? The first vector I do believe is that just open source is going to be the defining technology in AI, and crypto is the best form of mobilization of open source. Without crypto, open source is basically a kumbaya movement, right? It's people who help each other for the love of the game, but there is no like hard economic alignment, hard incentives to make people work. I think Shaw put this out recently, saying some of the most important open source repos in the world are just maintained by people because they love what they do, and basically half the biggest technology systems in the world will just go down if they stop loving what they do. And crypto is like a really, really good guardrail against that because you're economically incentivizing people to continue to contribute to technology that is beneficial to everyone and open to everyone. And I think the second thing which a lot of people kind of overlook is crypto has done so much work and so much deep research into verifiability and trust assumptions. Where today a lot of crypto just operates trustlessly, right? You trust the technology to work without having to trust any of the stakeholders. And what people don't understand about AI, and this is like my kind of nuanced view here, is AI is going to break what we know as the traditional software SLA, right? Because a software SLA is designed for an environment where everything is deterministic, right? It's always rule based. It's simple yes or no to whatever you do. AI is inherently probabilistic, right? So you need these trust assumptions, you need alignment, and you need systems that can really protect itself, in a world where like intelligence kind of runs free and runs amok. So I think these two kind of pillars are what really drove me to start Mira in the way we did. Very honestly, a lot of the crypto AI companies could effectively be just AI companies in Web 2. And all power to whoever kind of builds this in Web 2. But I do believe that there is a special part of the world now that truly believes, especially in the last year, that crypto economic incentives can be used in the most effective way to build these systems.
Yeah, and I'll even add a third use case in there. And this is the one I think about all the time, is like an AI agent, as an example, can't go into Chase Bank or can't go into whatever people's local bank is and just open up a bank account, but it can spin up a wallet. Heck, it can spin up hundreds of wallets in incredibly fast time. So if we really do think we're going to have these like autonomous agents that, have their own kind of like simulacrum of brain function, like this is obviously incredibly important. So we've talked a little bit about like the industry at large. Let's talk a little bit about what Mira is bringing to market and like what is the underlying problem you guys are hoping to solve.
Yeah, I mean, so give you context of how we got here, right? So when we started out, I'm not going to say that I had some like epiphany in my sleep that this is what I want to build, right? We started like everyone else does, is experimenting and seeing what works and what doesn't. In that process, we end up building a few interesting applications, few interesting products, um, and we really, some of them worked, some of them didn't, but all of them faced the same problem: is they look great as demos, but they didn't scale. If something kept breaking at every point of time. And the reason for that was very simple: is that LLMs hallucinate. It's like a feature where they're probabilistic, they exist on a graph, they're not rule based where you have clear defined outcomes. And what this basically means is that you cannot have high consequence systems built around them. Today, all PMF and AI falls in two categories. It's either entertainment. I would classify everything from like AI XPT to Elisa to everything as entertainment. And then there's like co-pilots. A co-pilot basically puts the responsibility of accountability on the human who's operating the AI. Right? These are not autonomous creatures. You can't hold the agent responsible for making a mistake or something like that. My core tenant and like the team's core tenant is that the true potential of AI is autonomous. The human should not be involved in the loop. But the technology today is not there yet to be able to serve that. So Mira's mission is basically how do we move AI to a world of autonomy as quickly as possible. And the core bottleneck there is how do you solve for hallucination? How do you reduce the error rate to get AI to a point where it really, can be used reliably with like high degree of accuracy? And we spent a greater part of last year just to focus on that research and published something pretty interesting, which has been now kind of widely cited in a lot of places as a breakthrough in how to get LLM reliability up, which is like a very simple premise of using wisdom of the crowds. Right? Basically, diverse LLMs working together tend to have significantly lower hallucination rates than a single LLM. We've proved that you can get 10x higher reliability and 10x higher accuracy using like an ensemble or like a panel of LLMs versus a single one. And we've basically designed a net new network, which is basically this global network of LLMs that kind of work together to give you the most reliable output.
And then for people that are less, maybe we'll call them AI fluid, talk to them a little bit, or fluent. Talk to them a little bit about like a use case where this would make like a lot of sense, where we need this kind of ensemble. We need this like, I'd almost call it like multi-factor checking by other LLMs.
Yeah, that's a great question, right? So usually this is, I think of like hallucinations as a second order effect, where a lot of people who try AI figure out it doesn't work, churn out, and then they're like, okay, we need to solve for hallucinations. So an example I can give you of a real life customer is Delphi Digital, right? So Delphi Digital, a lot of people know in crypto, is basically like a pretty well-known research publication. They put out like incredible reports, very well researched, very well thought through, some of them opinionated as well. And they basically wanted to build an intelligence stack that you could use to kind of talk to all of their research, basically like a global brain. They call it the Oracle. Um, the issue there was that the Oracle used to hallucinate. So if you asked it like, okay, why is Delphi bullish on Solana, it would say just some random gibberish like 3 out of 10 times. The issue there is like you can always claim that the AI makes mistakes, but a lot of times people trust Delphi's judgment and make like investment decisions off of that. Now what that is it's a high tail risk thing because it carries a lot of reputational as well as a lot of reputational as well as a lot of like legal liability to it, because someone acts on something that the AI says, assuming that it's what Delphi said, and it turns out that it's not what Delphi said. It can just leave a pretty bad taste in people's mouth. And 3 out of 10 mistakes is like a high enough number that it's not good enough to be deployed, right? So Delphi kept searching for a solution, saying, how do we get this hallucination rate lower? How do we get error rates like 1%, 2%, 3%? And Mira was the only solution that they could use, because what Mira did was basically said, okay, let GPT-4 answer the question. So if I asked the Delphi Oracle, what is was like, why are you bullish on Solana? And the Oracle would say Delphi is bullish on Solana for, let's say, for example, Solana is going to hit 10,000 TPS next year, right? Hypothetically. Now, how do you know that 10,000 TPS is actually factually correct as per the underlying report or not? What we do is we take that fact, send it to like three independent models. All three of those models have to, achieve consensus that this is accurate in context of the underlying, report. And only if it is fully accurate does it go to the end user. If not, it continuously gets regenerated till the output is, consensus has been achieved. What this lets us do is basically take these error rates from like 30% all the way to like 3%, right? And like significantly improve reliability for all these systems.
Yeah, and I remember there was a news story. This must have been almost like probably 12 months ago at this point, where somebody was doing legal research. It was a lawyer, and they were writing a brief, and the ChatGPT started to cite case law that didn't exist. So one that has huge legal liabilities as well. Like if you start citing incorrect case law, like you yourself could be going to jail. So given the amount that people are using, these LLM models, talk to us a little bit about like the integrations you guys have thus far. You mentioned Delphi. Like, is this something we're seeing? Like, something like an Anthropic take interest in this? Is this largely like just crypto companies are interested in your guys' method of reducing hallucinations?
I think, see, reducing hallucinations is broadly a open question across the board. I mean, even today, right, after 2 years and after $100 billion, ChatGPT still has ChatGPT makes mistakes as a disclaimer below. I think the interesting thing here is everyone's taking different approaches. Like companies like Anthropic are basically trying to build their own scaffolding, because it's game theoretic, right? If they say that we're going to use multiple models, they're basically saying my model is not good enough, which they don't want to admit. I think where Mira is seeing the most demand in terms of integration is actually the agent frameworks, because the agent frameworks don't use their own model, right? They just build tooling around models to like have AI do a bunch of stuff, but agent frameworks get better as the underlying intelligence get better. So if Mira can go to them and say, okay, we're going to give you like much more reliable intelligence, the agent frameworks are going to go to their customers and say, okay, now we have much more reliable agents. So that's why we're seeing a lot of uptake coming in both across Web 2 and Web 3.
And I'm quite curious about like the underlying implementation of this. Like, how does this manifest on your guys' side? Is it you guys have multiple different models that are essentially like functioning as fact checkers? That anytime a query comes in, you guys are then using each of these models to generate an output, and then you're essentially getting consensus amongst all of those models to determine like, yes, this is actually accurate. 10,000 TPS is correct.
Yes. So currently, how it works is we have this global network of nodes. A node is basically a model with underlying compute, right? Think of it like a Ethereum validator node or whatever. And this operates like a global cloud. Now, how our system is built out, like the customer only interacts with an API. And this API is like OpenAI compatible. So it integrates into your existing systems. You don't have to really do anything apart from changing the URL and your API key. Then what we do is based on the request, we have what we call a model router, which routes the request to the closest model you choose. So let's say I want to use GPT-4, or let's say I want to use DeepSeek R1 as my base model, and then do the verification on top of that output. Right. So it will first send the query to like a DeepSeek R1 node to generate the output. Then that output is basically, we have some, this is proprietary technology what we use, but we use this thing called binarization and sharding. So this is very similar to how like parallel blockchains work, right? Parallel blockchains are are faster because they basically just run all the transactions in parallel, especially the ones that don't interact with each other. So what we do is we take the output of the AI model, we break it into specific claims, and we run all those verifications in parallel. So we can be significantly faster than running all those claims like sequentially through like a single set of models, right? And then these claims are then sent to like different ensembles who themselves are AI nodes, right? So let's say in this case, the 10,000 TPS claim is going to be sent to one node, which is a GPT-4o, one node, which is a Llama 3.3 70B, and one node, which is a Claude 3.5 Sonnet. And each of these nodes have to independently assess that this is valid or invalid. It's It's a binary yes or no. And only if all three of them independently assess this is valid, is then the output sent back to the end user. If that consensus is not reached, there's like a circular loop of regeneration that occurs until consensus is reached. So what this ensures is there will be a lot of output that's false or hallucinating, but that output is basically gated at this verification, and it's not sent to the end user till like all three of these models achieve consensus.
Yeah, there's a few potential issues. I'm curious how you guys have approached it. Is one is like how do you actually parse out the specific claims that will be generated? So that's one, and then let me have you answer that, and I'll think of the second one that I just forgot.
Sure. So the first one is it's a broadly understood problem statement. So there's a paper called Fever that was put out by like Meta and Amazon a few years ago. This was in context of creating knowledge graphs, right? Knowledge graphs are basically this idea of having an entity and like sub entities and stuff created from like a large piece of data. We use a similar technology where we're basically able to map entities and claims, right? So if the query is like in this Delphi case, suppose there are five claims, right? Saying, uh, let's say Solana is 10,000 TPS, Solana ecosystem projects are going to hit like 5 billion in TVL. There might be something else about team members and something else about something else. This Fever like extraction system is able to actually extract each of these five claims as like binary verifiable claims. And then each of these are then run in parallel and sent to these ensembles and then reconstructed at the end. So this is
Yeah.
technology that's broadly battle tested, I'd say.
And then the second problem I could see is when I use a like more of an intensive reasoning model, I'll get latency and it will actually drive me a little bit crazy. So what is what is the thing that you guys have done to combat some of the latency? Because we're having multiple models essentially running in parallel and then consolidating their response in order for verification. And then you said like, hey, if there's not consensus reached, then there's a regeneration process. What are some of the things that like you guys do to combat the latency issue, given that user experience? Like the users hate waiting.
Yeah, that's a great question. So it really depends on the use case. So sometimes users don't really care about latency. So they will be like, as long as I get a really reliable output, I'm willing to let the model willing to let the system do the work. But in a lot of use cases, latency does matter, right? Because you're dealing with customers who need like low second times, which is why we do the parallelization, right? Because the whole point of running this stuff in parallel is instead of running this entire process through sequentially through like one set of models, let's say in this case, I'm running it through like five sets of models. What that does is immediately it immediately drops down my latency from like let's say 4x to like 1x or like 0.5x compared to like just a baseline, right? The other thing is the verification. How it works is it ingests a lot of information, but the output token is only like a yes or a no, right? Because it's not giving you like a full output answer. And latency in terms of an LLM is much higher on the output token versus the input token. So these two kind of techniques allow us to kind of minimize our latency quite significantly. Of course, it's a little bit more than just a base model, but we're also kind of giving you reliability, right? So most of customers or users that we work with are people who are willing to trade off like a sub-second or a few sub-seconds here and there for like just a higher degree of reliability.
Yeah, and that makes complete sense to me. And then I'm curious, like, what stage is your guys' company at? Is this something like anyone can go in, hook into an API, and integrate with? Like, where are you guys at from like a release perspective?
So in the release, we have a V0.2 release right now, which basically means we're live and running with, I think, 15 customers, cumulatively doing about 300,000 verification requests a day on the network. We do expect like sometime in H1, we'll have a fully public release. But I think right now it's a lot more about testing system reliability and stuff. What we have done though is we've opened up our network to a pure generation model. So you can use the network to generate whatever you want without verification. But like to open up the full verified generation piece, we expect it to be like a couple of months at least.
Got it, got it. And then I know you guys are have some like exciting announcements coming up in terms of like getting more builders on the platform. Could you kind of expand upon what you guys are doing there?
Yeah, sure. So the one thing we realize is, what Mira enables is not just like building better AI products today, but unlocking what can be built tomorrow. Right? I think we've seen this entire generation of agents on virtuals and AI16Z and stuff, but we've all come to the conclusion that they're like good, but there's something lacking there. Right? These are like LLM wrappers that people find a bit exciting, but nothing beyond that. I think what's going to happen now is, personally, we're going to see these LLMs and these agents get more high consequence. They'll be doing more things autonomously. They'll just be given more power and empowered to do more interesting things. And that's a world like we want to support in as much as we can. So we actually recently announced Magnum Opus, which is our builder grant program. The simple goal there is to get the best teams building the most audacious AI products powered by like high consequence use cases, and give them all the tools across capital, across distribution, across you know infrastructure that they need to succeed. So anybody who's listening to this podcast who thinks they're a fit, doesn't matter whether you're like in ideation or you've already started a company or whatever, feel free to go to our website, which is opus.mira.network, and apply, and we'd be happy to kind of consider.
Absolutely. And definitely everyone go to the website. I'll put the link in the description. Now, I'm quite curious because we talked about like kind of these GPT wrappers. We've talked about how, AI agents in the future are going to be taking on more responsibility, so higher consequence. Where do you think the value accrual will occur? Because I think I was reading Balaji was saying that, like, hey, maybe these GPT wrappers are actually the thing that like will be the winning use case as we see like, hey, OpenAI puts out a model, and 3 months later, a cheaper model comes to fruition that's like 95% there, maybe 90% there. Where do you think the value will really end up in AI?
So I do think a rapper will succeed. I just think that it's a rapper of what, and like what's the intent of the rapper, because building a business, like most SaaS companies are rappers around cloud, right? But that still means that you need to build the business logic that actually works and makes you successful. I think in AI it's going to be the same thing. It's going to be like who defines their problem statement well enough, who understands what it takes to acquire customers, and like really build PMF from there, because the tools are going to be commoditized. I'd say even Mira, like 3 to 5 years out, there's not like there will be multiple networks that try to do stuff like this. I do expect that Mira will be a first mover and build that reputation as a reliable infrastructure support. But like I genuinely believe that the in the next 5 years, majority of value creation in AI is going to be at the app layer, and the people who can really build out apps that create value for users and customers are going to have basically free intelligence and incredible distribution. So it's going to be like a match made in heaven.
Yeah, absolutely. And then we always like to ask our guests for one startup idea. We have a lot of builders that listen to the podcast, and they're always looking for things that they feel like are under addressed in the market, or they just feel like will be great opportunities maybe this year or in years to come. What do you think is a really good opportunity that some of these builders can jump on?
Yeah, I think the most interesting opportunity right now, just given the convergence of near free intelligence and extremely conducive crypto markets, like crypto regulation, is figuring out how you can vampire attack some large AI application, right? Basically, you have free intelligence. You can basically delay monetization as much as you want. Most AI companies on the application layer so far had to monetize early because their AI bill was too large, right? So they actually burnt a lot of money to get here. And using like crypto incentives early on to like reward users and stuff, I do believe there are consumer applications out there that are like ripe for disruption. And given the regulatory climate, I think this is the only time you can actually do something with that and not go to jail. So if someone can really figure out, let's take, what's a good AI app, right? Let's take like 11 Labs or something, which is like voice AI. Can you create like a social network around that, which is like, incentivized with tokens and completely like open source models in the backend? And that's like a winning formula. You don't even need like a team of 3 or 4 people to really execute that.
Yeah, I gotta say one of the craziest things is like how few people you now need on your team with like with and how am I blanking on the name of my cursor, like AI. It's just so good. I remember when they rolled out, like it was essentially our internal version of GitHub Copilot at Google. I was like, oh man, I feel like, what do you think is the future of like developers? Of course we'll always have developers, but like these tools are getting so much better. Do we see like the death of junior engineers? Obviously, not literally people.
Yeah, I know. I mean, I would say engineers need to do work a lot harder to keep their jobs. I'm not gonna lie. Like I was like I used to code a lot. I stopped coding for the last few years, but since I picked it up this year, it's just like my output has been 10x or what it has ever been, right? And I'm assuming I'm a pretty bad coder, so anyone who's like even slightly better than I am, I'm sure is like getting a lot more out of it. Uh, I think being a good software engineer in the future is going to move from being a great like it's going to move from being a great like guitarist to being a great orchestra conductor. How can you make like these autonomous systems work in the direction you want them to and deliver like incredible product? And like the way I kind of frame it is, this is the worst it's going to ever be. So you can just imagine how good it's going to get in like the
Oh yeah.
next 2 or 3 years, right? So it's exciting times.
And I know people like struggle thinking exponentially, but that's like really how you have to think. It's like it's not going to be like two times better in a year. It's going to be like incredibly better. I tend to take, because I'm a marketer at heart. I'm a non-practicing engineer at this point. Is that like, the value of, if we have these agents that can really pump out good code and you can just manage teams, it's like, well, who raises the most money? It's like, well, a good marketer. Well, who like builds the best products? Well, who can recruit talent? And so I tend to think like all the value comes to like the future DevRels of the world. But that's my own bias speaking. But finally, where can people learn more about you? It seems like you guys have a great grant program coming up. Like, where can they learn more about all these kinds of topics?
Yeah, please follow us on Twitter, join our Discord. There's like a lot of interesting discussions that are happening on the technology and distribution, and the community is pretty active across the world. Also, feel free to just DM me on Twitter or LinkedIn or wherever you kind of find this podcast. I'm always happy to kind of walk people through what we're doing and find more supporters and customers in any way possible.
Absolutely. Well, everyone, let's continue building the future of on-chain AI until the next episode.